Welcome to another episode of Power Core Productions and Podcastings. I am your host, Jerron Harrington, back to hit you another video. And if you're listening to this video now, I am just going to say at the moment, the original video for What If Deku Was a Power Ranger Part 3 had to be taken down simply because the audio had been messed up and I was getting multiple complaints about the audio at certain points during the video. So I had to re-edit a lot of the volume work and repost this video. So if you're seeing it now, you're not having tricks play on you. There was an original video, but the audio was bad, so some of the parts had to be re-recorded, reshot, and reworked into a well-functioning video. Also, the trailer production that I had made for the post video, I've decided to just take that off, and there's going to be a special trailer video that's going to come out later on tonight, so you can see and vote for what series you want to see next on Power Core Productions and Podcastings. It's not going to be anything big or long. It's just going to be a whole bunch of title pages with potential what if stories that you guys might like and might want to see in the future. I want you guys to vote down in the comment section below what's your favorite, which ones you want to see, and tell me some of your own what if ideas so that in the future we can take it into consideration. I have a lot planned for the fall and winter of this year, as we are on the road to 1K and beyond. Power Core Productions and Podcastings, it's continuing to grow each and every day. And first and foremost, above everything else, I want to say thank you to everyone that supports Power Core Productions and Podcastings. I cannot do it without you. You guys make the channel grow, you make the core grow, and in the end, to become the best anime what if maker. You know, it really does mean a lot to me to have this support, so I thank you. Thank you for putting up with the technical issues, you know, the setbacks that we've been having recently, but I'm not going to let them get me down. I'm going to keep moving forward. We're going to keep grinding, keep growing. This core is going to keep moving, not going to be stopped so easily. So again, thank you to everyone who supports Power Core Productions and Podcastings. It means a whole lot to me, and I cannot do it without you guys, so thank you. Thank you so much for sticking by the good and the bad. But anyway, we're not going to keep you waiting with the remake for this video. Let's just get straight into it. What If Deku Was a Power Ranger? Heroes of the Morphing Grid, Part 3. Enjoy.
たった一つたった一つのたった一人たった一人の私はここ
Following the events of the USJ attack, Class 1A as well as the campus of UA would be given a few days off as the staff and heroes will look to see just how the USJ had been infiltrated by villains. But even more so for the few that knew, they would also be looking into the investigation of the Putty Patrol. Alpha more so worried by the fact that the Putty Patrol had been able to make their way to the dimension this quickly, deducing that they were most likely scouts for Lord Draken, debating whether or not they had destroyed all of them, as it was imperative that not one be left alive, for if just one was able to report back to Lord Draken its location, it could mean dire consequences for the dimension as a whole. Even with All Might and the #1 hero, as well as a world filled with heroes, there was no telling if they would be strong enough to stand against Lord Draken and his forces, who would already be continuing their conquest of the multiverse as a whole, attacking many of the Rangers from many different time periods and eras. None were safe, whether it be from the Mighty Morphin era, or even as far as the Time Force. Many were experiencing changes within the ebbs and flow of time itself. Even the My Hero Academia universe would be suffering from a bit of the drawback, as history and time was starting to be rewritten and rearranged as well, as the power coins had never existed in this timeline up until now. Soon, however, the students would be brought back once again, as the sports festival would be arriving soon ahead. Mr. Aizawa encouraging his students to prepare, as this would be a good way for the first year students to show off their strengths and what they could do. While some in the class would be worried about the fact that villains had just recently attacked, and they didn't think that having a sports festival would be the most appropriate, Mr. Aizawa would assure them of their safety, as well as stating that they had to keep a strong face, not allowing the villains to show that they had been rattled in any way, shape, or form. If they caved in now, it would merely give the would-be villains and attackers exactly what they wanted. As class ended that day, Mr. Aizawa would hold back Deku and Bakugo, as he had some news for the two of them, explaining that since they already had quirks of their own, they would not be permitted to use their morphers during the sports festival. However, they would be allowed to keep them underneath their uniforms in case of an emergency. Better to be safe than sorry in any circumstance. With that in mind, in 2 weeks until the sports festival, Deku and Bakugo would train respectively, each one practicing using their quirks and preparing for whatever might come their way. Deku even going as far as to study some of Endeavor's tapes. After all, he was the number 2 hero just after All Might, and he shared a flame quirk similar to his own. Soon, the day of the sports festival would arrive, and everyone would be having both nervousness and excitement within them, as they looked forward to what was to lie ahead, an opportunity to truly display what their quirks could do, among other pro heroes and agencies that would be scouting out new and fresh talent. Among the crowd would be 2 hooded figures, 2 men who were not from this time period at all, but rather they were from a different timeline altogether. Their reality had now been changed, and as such, a criminal had recently escaped into an unknown future. The 2 beings kept themselves shrouded in robe as they attended the sports festival, believing that this would be the location of their target. As the students all gathered in the main entranceway, being put in full display of the Coliseum, as many fans would watch in the rows as well as around the area and the world, Miss Midnight would go through the proceedings. Bakugo, being the first place runner in the entrance exam, would give the opening speech, although his speech would only consist of him declaring that he would be the winner of these games, thus painting a target on both he as well as Class 1A's back, angering many others in the stands as they felt as though he were discounting them before the matches even began. The first contest would be the obstacle race, as the students would have to race through a series of obstacles around the arena and make their way back. As the obstacle race was about to begin, all of the students would gather together at the entrance tunnel, preparing and waiting for the sound of President Mike to yell "Go!" Everyone's hearts pumping in exhilaration as they readied themselves for what was to come. At the sound of the word "Go!", a giant wall of ice would then emerge at the start of the entranceway. Shoto Todoroki slowing everyone else down and looking to gain a massive lead. However, he wouldn't hold it for long, as a blast of green and red would then emanate, melting and blowing away the ice, allowing everyone else to go through, as both Deku and Bakugo would be on his heels. What would soon become a 3-way race would be between both Deku, Bakugo, and Todoroki, the 3 jockeying and moving for position, fighting one another as well as battling the obstacles in front of them. Coming first into contact with the zero-pointer robots, each boy would work to defeat the robot in their own unique way. Todoroki would simply freeze the robots over, holding them still and in place as he moved past them, as their frozen mechanical bits would eventually fall to pieces and slow down the other competition. Bakugo, using his explosions, would simply blast the robots to shreds, while Deku, hovering in the air using his flames in the soles of his feet, would focus concentrated blast at the head, taking them out swiftly and effectively, each one displaying their own unique style of battle and putting their talents on full display for others to see. Soon they would come across the Great Canyon. Todoroki would once again use his ice quirk effectively, creating an ice bridge in order for him to slide over without worrying and moving from stone to stone, while Bakugo would simply propel himself in the air, blasting and moving through from pole to pole as he would jump across the canyon, while Deku would simply fly across, finding his flame quirk to be rather effective in that regard. Todoroki would take note of this, seeing how Deku moved and used his flames. He would see the image of his father in Deku. As the race would enter into its final stretch, the three boys would make their way across the land filled of mines, trying to avoid the explosions as they were making their way down the final stretch. Todoroki trying to take out Bakugo and Deku as well, and Deku merely avoiding the attacks of the other two, flying high and above everyone else, being just out of reach, angering Bakugo, thinking that Deku was a cheat for not going through the hard way. However, Deku would simply shake his head, thinking that he were going to be working smarter and not harder. While he was able to avoid the landmines, it wouldn't give him a lead for much longer though, as he wasn't fully used to using his quirk to fly for extended periods of time, and eventually his legs would begin to tire out, as he would slowly make his way to the ground, now his flames not moving at high speeds as they once did. As they would soon reach towards the end of the goal line, the three boys would make one last desperate push towards the finish, Deku putting everything he had into the bottom of his feet in order to propel himself forward, Todoroki creating a bridge of ice in order to slide with no friction and glide using his full speed towards the finish. However, it would be Bakugo who would prove to be the victor in this situation. Spinning his hands in a rotating manner, he would create explosions that would propel and twist him forward, just narrowly blasting past the other two as he would claim first place, followed by Deku, who would gain second by just a hair, and Todoroki, who would take third. The three boys showing what they could do and tiring themselves out till the very end, as Bakugo would hold his hand up high in victory, proud of the fact that he was able to beat out the Ice Boy quirk user, as well as beating out Deku. Of course, even if it was just narrowly, he knew in the end that he would have the edge. After all, he wasn't just the Red Ranger, he was the future #1 hero, and as such, it would behoove him to always be on top. Deku would be happy just to place second, and Todoroki would be angered that he came in third, but even more so that he lost to Deku of all people. As soon everyone else would file into the arena respectively, soon the cavalry battle would be underway, as everyone would gather into their teams after receiving their respective headbands. Bakugo would be the #1 target with the 10 million point headband, while Deku would only have a headband of 205 points, while Todoroki would have a headband of 200. The teams would be formed a little differently though in this timeline, as Bakugo would now be the main target. Not many would want to work with him. However, he would be able to get the same group as before, with Kirishima, Ashio, and Zero. The main change would be with Deku. While Deku was definitely impressive, he didn't paint himself as a large target or anyone that people wanted to beat specifically. So when he approaches Uraraka and Ida, they accept his offer to join and be a part of his team. As well as adding Tokoyami, that would basically round out his group, while Todoroki would form his group, being Mei Hatsume, as well as Momo Yaoyorozu and Dinky Kaminari, forming his team and getting into position as they readied themselves for the Cavalry battle. His main focus being to take down Bakugo and grab that 10 million headband point. As the battle would get underway, everyone would obviously be gunning after Bakugo, who would look forward to the challenge and show his effectiveness when it came to battle strategy, moving effectively and taking down many of the would-be teams that would challenge him, stealing their points at an even greater rate. Deku, on the other hand, would have his own strategy. Instead of going straight after Bakugo, or Todoroki for that matter, it would be better to just let them take each other out, deciding rather to go after other teams with smaller points, allowing their total to just build up slowly over time. And this proved to be effective. They were able to combat whatever teams came their way, and they weren't the number one target, as everyone would desperately be after the 10 million point headband. Bakugo would just look forward to slapping all of the competition away, especially the annoying talkative students of Class 1B, until eventually he would come face to face with Shoto Todoroki, who would move his team in perfect sync and coordination as he aimed to take the 10 million headband points for himself, creating a wall of ice to separate the teams and create just enough distance. He would move quickly before using one of Mei Hatsume's inventions to try to get close enough to steal one of the headbands. Coming in just narrowly, he would snag away at Bakugo's neck, snatching a few of the headbands and thinking that he had gotten the 10 million point headband. However, he would be shocked to see that instead of 10 million, it were just merely 100. Bakugo smartly swapping out the headbands at the last moment, taunting Todoroki as his team would turn around and try again. The two duking it out until the final minutes of the Cavalry battle were finished, as the places would remain the same. Bakugo coming in first, and Todoroki surprisingly coming in second, while Deku's team would come in third, as they were able to get enough points to successfully climb up into the third ranked spot, eventually just deciding to lay low and allow everyone else to fight amongst themselves. Deku taking more of the pacifist approach when it came to this battle, thinking that it would be better to work smarter and not harder, only extending energy when needed and knowing that they would have an even more grueling challenge to come later. With the Cavalry battle now at an end, there would be a short break before the announcement of the final event. As everyone went to relax and get some much needed food and drink, Deku, while recovering in the locker rooms, would be met by Todoroki, who would ask to speak with him privately one-on-one. When the two boys were away from everyone else and could speak in private, Todoroki would ask a rather odd question, asking Deku if he were by any chance the son of Endeavor. Deku being rather perplexed at this, as he had no reason to think that he of all people would be the son of the number 2 hero, making it very clear that he was of no relation to him or Todoroki in any way. Todoroki briefly explaining why he had come to this conclusion, seeing how Deku used his quirk a lot similar to his father's. Deku would simply explain that he only used his quirk that way since it was what worked best for him. Todoroki would merely scoff at this notion, explaining a bit of his own backstory and the reason for why he chose not to use his flame quirk, telling of how he was the product of a quirk marriage, and how he were merely created to surpass All Might, and that he would become the number 1 hero by not using his flame quirk at all, in spite of his father. Deku would admonish him for this, stating that that quirk was his alone, and that if he were going to be the number 1 hero, or at least aim to be, then he was going to have to be at his strongest, and that if he came at this with anything less than his absolute best, he was going to fail. Todoroki would take these words to heart, but Deku wouldn't falter. He would make it very clear that he too were aiming to become the number 1 hero. And that was a goal that he was not going to give up so easily. And if Todoroki wasn't going to take it serious, then he, along with everyone else in this competition who was giving it their all, was going to make him regret it. As the students would gather again for the final participation in the exams, many of the teachers would be looking on, rather impressed with how the first years were conducting themselves. More so looking out through the crowd in the private box office would be All Might, who would be sitting next to the small Alpha 6. The two of them looking on and seeing many of the students had impressive abilities, remarking that they would make fine candidates to become Rangers. As the final event would be a one-on-one battle tournament, the brackets would be arranged as everyone would see where they would be seated and who they would be facing in the first rounds. Deku, seeing that his first opponent would be a student from Class 1B, that being Shinzo Hitoshi. Before his battle would begin, Deku would be approached by Oboro, as Ojiro would explain to him that he should watch out for Shinzo's quirk, remarking that he had fell for it and thus was why he had been taken out of the tournament, remarking that if he responded to him in any way, he would be placed under a form of hypnosis. Deku taking this to heart as his match would begin. As he came face to face with Shinzo, Shinzo would try to get him to speak, but Deku would at least try not to fall for it, as he would move forward immediately, hoping to attack and take him out quickly, blinding him in the face with a large flash of fire, as Shinzo would yell out in rage, trying to get Deku to respond. Deku in the heat of battle would slip up for a brief moment, giving Shinzo exactly what he wanted and causing him to be put under his hypnotic control. Shinzo dusting himself off before commanding Deku to leave the arena quickly. Deku would then turn around and slowly start to walk away, as many in the crowd would begin to yell for him to snap out of it, Bakugo among many of them. But Deku, he simply couldn't get out of this hold. Deep inside of his subconscious and in his mind, he could see himself in another plane of existence, looking out into a starry night sky. As he looked out, he would see himself on a grid of sorts, seeing electric atoms and beams of light spreading all around. He could see the lights and the colors, from red to blue to yellow to green to black to purple to orange to pink to white, silver, gold, and everything in between. He could see figures within the colors as well. What he didn't know was that in that briefest of moments, his subconscious had been connected to the Morphing Grid, an added perk as the Morphing Grid had unknown powers and abilities, as he would simply hear the voice to not fall, to not falter, that this was not the will of the Morphing Grid. Deku would soon snap back into reality, just narrowly going over the edge as he would stop himself, before turning around to face Shinzo once again. This time not falling for his tricks, Deku would move forward and take Shinzo out quickly, not wanting to do too much harm, but wanting to make sure to get the quick win in advance. Knocking him out with a single punch and sending him out of the arena, Deku would be declared the winner as the first round would continue. The first rounds would wrap up the same as in canon. Todoroki making quick work of Zero, Dinky being defeated by Shizaka. Tenya Ida would also get his victory, after being made as a display for Mei Hatsume and her inventions. Mina Ashia would get the win over Aoyama. Tokoyami would defeat a rather flustered Momo Yaoyorozu. Kirishima would defeat Tetsu Tetsu. And the match that truly caught a lot of people's attention would be Uraraka versus Bakugo. Among them being All Might and Alpha, as they were truly impressed with Uraraka's creativity and her abilities to think on the fly, Her plan was almost flawless, and she was able to hold on with Bakugo, even if it were just for a short while. Alpha being very impressed by her determination, but also by her soft and spirited nature. As he watched her battle, he couldn't help but see images of the young Kimberly as he did so, as she reminded him of her in that way. And in a way, he thought that they had potentially found a candidate for the Pink Ranger powers. Soon would come the quarter-final rounds, and the first matchup would be Deku versus Todoroki. As Deku made his way out to the stands, he would be stopped in the hallway by Endeavor, as he would tell him not to go easy on his son, explaining that he saw how Deku fought, and he was proud to see that someone emulated him in his abilities. However, Deku would quickly rebuttal, making it very clear that while he was thankful to learn something from the number 2 hero, he was his own hero, as well as Todoroki, and that he really didn't understand his son at all. Endeavor would be a bit annoyed at this sentiment, but wouldn't care either way, as Deku would make his way to the arena floor, as he would come face to face with Shoto Todoroki. Before the match would begin, Deku would ask Todoroki to please use his full power and to not hold back, but Todoroki would only look more annoyed as Deku asked, as he stated he had no intention on using his father's quirk, as he would go on a full frontal assault using only his ice quirk. Deku would work to evade the ice, as well as blasting away with his own flames, as Deku would rocket himself into the air, using his flames as jets in his feet to move around. Todoroki would use his ice like missiles. It would look as if Deku were a jet flying around, and Todoroki would be on the ground with a missile launcher of ice trying to shoot him out of the sky. They would soon engage into a game of cat and mouse, Deku trying to tag Todoroki and Todoroki trying to shoot down Deku. As the fight would continue to move on, Deku would start to emulate more and more moves similar to Endeavor, taking his studying very seriously and doing his best to combat Todoroki's ice assault. As the match would continue, Todoroki's psyche would slowly start to play tricks on him, as the more Deku moved like Endeavor, the more he saw his father in Deku. Todoroki soon going into a frenzy and a rage, yelling out that he wanted nothing to do with his father and that he would defeat him. Fighting and not losing any of his control, Todoroki would slowly start to slip, not being his true self. Deku could tell this as Todoroki was getting sloppier and sloppier, and he was finding him easier to counter and invade, until eventually he were able to pin Todoroki once and for all. Todoroki looking up as Deku could see the fear in his eyes. Todoroki feeling as if he were at the mercy of his father once again. However, rather than attack or take advantage of the situation, Deku would simply lift Todoroki back up and simply embrace him into a hug. As tears would fall from Todoroki's eyes, he would soon realize that he were indeed not fighting against his father, but was instead fighting Deku, as Deku would simply tell him that everything were alright, that he wasn't his father, and that his quirk was his alone, and that he had to learn to be his own hero. That was the only way he could break free of this cycle. As Todoroki would find closure, he would thank Deku for allowing him to see the error. Alpha and All Might would look very impressed with how Deku had conducted himself. Even in the midst of a tournament and in a battle that he would more than likely want to win, he showed care and concern for his fellow man first. Alpha was now even more happier than ever that he had trusted the young boy to become a ranger. Now feeling as if Todoroki were on the right track, Deku would then move back, creating distance. telling him that the real fight started now. Shoto would agree as flames would begin to emit from the flame side of his body, as well as ice, as he was now more in balance. As the two would engage into their full brawl, Todoroki would use his ice as a defense and his fire for offense, while Deku would try to play offense and defense with his fighting style, kicking away at the ice with his flame-emitted legs, and using his flaming fist to counter Todoroki's fire. The two of them trading strikes and going back and forth with one another until it came to the climax of the battle. As they would charge everything they had into their final assault, Deku would yell that he was going to put everything he had into this final attack, and Todoroki yelled that he was going to do the same. As Midnight would yell to Cementos to create a barrier to block away the potential attack, the two would collide in a flurry of blue and red and green, a bright light emanating from the battlefield as walls of cement would be used to slow down the attacks, the two pushing each other back immensely in a strong surge of heat. As the dust would clear and settle, Midnight would look out to see who exactly had won the battle, but to hers and everyone else's shock in the arena, both Deku and Todoroki had taken each other out. With the match being called in a double tie, both boys would be eliminated, and effectively another opponent was going to basically get a free ride to the finals. That opponent would be Tenya Ida, as he would quickly make work of Ibara Shizukai, not wanting to harm the plant girl, but seeing she was much of a pacifist, he gave her an easy loss and advanced to the finals pretty much, as he had no opponent to face. Meanwhile, Fumikage Tokoyami would make quick work of Mina Ashido, as he would advance to the semi-final round, along with Katsuki Bakugo, who after a tough fight would defeat Kirishima. Now the committee had a decision to make. Did they let Bakugo and Tokoyami fight an extra round while Tenya Ida would get a free pass to the finals? Or would they do something a little more different and with a little more flair? As both Deku and Todoroki would meet Recovery Girl in the entranceway, she would kiss the two of them and restore much of their stamina, although they would need some rest. They would decide to go sit up in the stands, thinking that they weren't injured too bad, but they were extremely tired. They wouldn't say much to the other classmates who would be watching along with them, as the two of them would simply sit down and collapse in exhaustion, looking on at the final rounds, as it would now become a three-way dance, as Bakugo, Tokoyami, and Ida would all face each other in a three-way to determine the final three spots in the sports festival tournament. Cementos would create a new arena that would be a complete circle instead of a rectangle. The tournament would then go as follows. The first one to be eliminated would go in third place, the second one to be eliminated would go in second, and the last one standing would be given first place. While Bakugo was a bit annoyed at not being able to take on Deku and Todoroki, he was still impressed with the power they were able to display, making a mental note to win here, but to also challenge those two in the future. After all, he refused to be outdone by that damn nerd, and Icy Hot was going to pay for holding out on him. As the battle would begin, Ida would try to move quickly and take out both of his opponents, using his legs and fighting in more of a kicking dynamic. He would try to kick away at Dark Shadow, who would be moving all around the arena, playing on both defense and offense, creating distance between Tokoyami and his two opponents, as Bakugo would be left in the middle, having to deal with both a short and long-range fighter. During the course of the battle, however, he would see that his explosions had a primordial effect on Tokoyami's Dark Shadow. He could feel his explosions had become a lot stronger since he had become a ranger, and he was going to take full effect of it, using his stun grenade to shock Dark Shadow and blind him just long enough as he would continue to wail and move on his assault. Ida would stay back to create space for himself, preparing both the engines in his calves as he was preparing for a reciprocal burst. He was going to move in a spinning kick formation, believing that with his long legs he could kick the both of them out of the arena and effectively win the match. Of course, if he didn't time it just right, then he would essentially waste through his special attack and would be gassed. As he waited for his opportunity, he would look and see as Bakugo were fighting on the edge of the arena along with Tokoyami, pushing him back slowly as they were just nearly both out of the arena. Ida, seeing this as his chance, he would lean forward and go into reciprocal burst, the flames from the engines in his calves going from a red to a bright blue, as he would move in an instant blur, preparing to throw a full roundhouse kick at the two of them, effectively taking them out both at once. However, Bakugo, with his more sharpened reflexes, would just narrowly dodge the reciprocal burst, feeling some of the aftermath of the attack as it would collide fully with Dark Shadow. Dark Shadow trying his best to block, but being injured from the attacks from Bakugo, he and Tokoyami would effectively fly out of the ring. As Ida would have put everything he had into the attack, he would be gassed with nothing left, as Bakugo, now going into his full fighting spirit, would give everything he had at the very end, launching explosions from every side as he would hit and take out Ida, before eventually landing a few hard strikes and punching him out of the arena, effectively winning the match and being the victor of the whole tournament. As Bakugo took a deep breath, happy and now ready to claim his victory, there was another hooded figure amongst the crowds, a figure with a discarded and mangled face, half mutated and half robotic. He would be holding a device in his palm that would be giving off readings, a special way to tell if someone's body had been connected to the morphing grid, and the more power that they used, the higher the reading would go. And he could tell that from his device, Bakugo had the most residual morphing grid energy within his system. Now seeing this as his opportunity, as the young boy was now extremely tired, he would soon call his robotic army into action, as from out of nowhere, weird robotic creatures would start to move all around the arena, effectively android-like humanoids, as they would all descend upon the floor of the arena, many in the crowd yelling and becoming afraid as they would start to exit, the robots beginning to swarm, until eventually there were almost 100, all surrounding Bakugo. Deku would look on in worry, and so would Todoroki, as many of the other students looked on in fear, seeing a whole robot army surrounding Bakugo. And among the army would be a man in a dark hood, as he would slowly take it off to reveal himself, his left eye seemingly made out of robotic pieces, as if he were half man and half machine. He would laugh out loud, explaining that he had been hired specifically at the request of Lord Draken to track down the so-called Ranger and bring him in, and from the readings that he had gotten from his device, that boy definitely fit the mold, telling him to hand over his morpher or else his life would not be guaranteed. Although tired, Bakugo would simply scoff, stating that he wasn't going to give up his morpher to anyone, especially some weird mutated freak like him. As he would pull his morpher out from under his jumpsuit, he would yell out Tyrannosaurus before morphing into the Red Ranger, pulling out his power sword and preparing to do battle with the robot army. As the man would introduce his cyclobots, he would send them to charge at Bakugo. As many of the pro heroes would see what were taking place, Endeavor and All Might would be the first ones to enter into the fray, moving to help aid young Bakugo as they would effectively start to take down the robotic army. As Bakugo would get to work as well, fighting off against them, he would soon be joined by a still recovering Deku, who would have morphed into his Green Ranger uniform, and Todoroki, who, now being tired from using both sides of his quirk, would still be working in overdrive, trying his best to help aid his two classmates. Alpha, seeing what was going on down below, would be worried for the team, especially for Deku and Bakugo, as he could see how tired they truly were, realizing that whoever this villain was, he was after the Morphers. He debated what he should do in this situation, if there was anything that he could do to help, as he could see that young Shoto were extremely tired along with the others. Knowing that he was a potential candidate, he would decide that if now were ever going to be the time, he would have to take a risk. A risk that could either result in their victory or in a terrible defeat. As Alpha would break away at the window, he would look down at the three young heroes as they were fighting off against the Cyclobots. As it looked as though Shoto were about to be overtaken, Bakugo and Deku would hold the line, as Alpha would yell out from above that he was sending in some reinforcement power. Both Deku and Bakugo would wonder what exactly Alpha was talking about, as from within his robotic body, he would pull out a single morpher along with a power coin placed inside. As he would aim it directly at Shoto, he would tell the young boy to catch, Shoto turning around and just narrowly catching the metallic device in his hand. As both Bakugo and Deku would be shocked to see that Alpha had chosen him to become a ranger. Todoroki would ask what exactly he was supposed to do with this thing, as Deku and Bakugo would continue fighting off the robot army. They would look to him and tell him to look and see what exactly was on the coin. Todoroki explained that it looked like some sort of elephant. They would explain that that was the Mastodon power, and they would run through quickly the sequence and how to morph. While Todoroki wasn't sure about all this, if it would help even the odds and he could get powers similar to both Deku and Bakugo, then it was worth the risk. As he would get into the morphing stance, he would activate the morpher before yelling Mastodon, as he would be emitted in a black and purple aura. His body would soon begin to morph and change. As of right now, the Black Mastodon Power Ranger had now emerged. With the three young Rangers now standing together, they would work as one to fight off against the robotic army. As the three young heroes would continue their fight, among the crowd, the two other mysterious hooded figures that had arrived would soon enter into the fray as well. With blasters in hand, they would shoot down the Psychobots rather effectively as they made their way down to the bottom of the Coliseum, both remarking that they had no idea that things would get this bad, wondering where Rancic could have possibly gotten so many Cyclobots from, as they believed they had destroyed them all back in the year of 2001. But none the matter, they would soon make their way to the bottom as they would see All Might and Endeavor looking to make their way towards Rancic, as the mutated villain would gladly welcome the challenge, as both All Might and Endeavor would go in for a punch. They would soon be horrified to see that the mutated figure had changed once again, his entire body now being coated in metal, as he had tanked the assault before pushing the two back, landing a few strikes of his own, one in particular hitting All Might in his injured area, causing him to cough up some blood, and Endeavor being shot back to the other side of the arena. As the man would introduce himself as Rancic, and that he had been hired specifically by Lord Dragon to bring in those who had stolen the power coins from his collection. remarking that there would be a great reward if he could be successful, and that the funds he could get from Lord Dragon would be more than enough to wage his war into the future. Remarking that his main fight was with the Time Force, and that soon he would get his revenge for being wrongly imprisoned. With the robot army mostly defeated, he would look to move and make his advancements on the 3 young rangers. However, before he could get any closer, he would be blasted away multiple times as 2 men in weird-like uniform would now arrive, both wearing a red beret as they had the logo of Silver Guardians placed on the backs of their uniforms. One with blonde hair and one with dark black hair, both looking to one another before running up to the forefront. The one with blonde hair stating that it was good to see Rancic again, and that this time he were going to go away for his crimes. As Rancic would look back rather annoyed, remarking that Time Force had now butted into his business once again. The one with dark black hair would state that this time they weren't going to let him get away, and that he was going to be going back to his cryostasis prison until the end of time. As the 3 young rangers would run up closer, they would ask the 2 just what they were doing, and how on earth did they have weapons to take on such a monster. The 2 would simply turn back to the 3, explaining that they were pretty well versed when it came to being rangers. After all, they were Power Rangers themselves. Showing off their morphers on both of their wrists, they would state that it was time for action. As the one with blonde hair would activate his morpher, yelling that it was time for Time Force, and his partner would yell out Quantum Power, as the 2 would be engulfed in a glow of red. The Red and Quantum Time Force Rangers would now be on the scene, looking to aid the heroes in battle against the monstrous Rancic. All Might and Endeavor would quickly get back to their feet and join into the battle as well. Seeing now that there were 2 more Power Rangers, All Might would wonder just where they had come from, but seeing that they were on their side, it was still more than enough for him. As he would stand beside the 2 Rangers, asking if there were any way that he could assist, the Rangers would simply tell him that they could take it from here, but that in the meantime, he should make sure that the civilians get to safety and take out any of the remaining Cyclobots. All Might would nod and do just so, as he and Endeavor would move to defeat the remaining straggling robots, as well as help evacuate many of the civilians, as some of the Colosseum were beginning to fall. All Might, using his immense speed and strength, would be able to hold the columns up, while Endeavor would blast away the debris, allowing for the civilians a chance to escape, as the 3 young Rangers would look on at the 2 older pros as they would engage in battle against the monstrous Rancic. While it was brief, they would get a chance to see how Pro Rangers really got to work. As the Time Force Red and Quantum Ranger would engage with Rancic, who would protrude a metal bone sword from his body, they would engage in a 2-on-1 assault, the 2 Rangers moving in unison and working as one, combating Rancic in every attack that he could throw at them, a combination of swordplay and blasters, beating him down effectively. Deku, Bakugo, and Todoroki couldn't help but look on and be impressed, as they clutched their own weapons at the ready, also finishing off any of the other Cyclobots that could be around, as they looked on in awe of the battle that was taking place. Alpha would be looking on as well, as from his universe, the Time Force Rangers never existed, so having a chance to see other Rangers in battle was rather unique for him, as the Rangers would work in beating down on Rancic. Both Eric and Wes would decide that now was the time to finish things. Entering into their battleizer modes, they would aim at full power their final attack on Rancic, who had now been weakened and beaten down. as they would shoot their blasters in specific spots, injuring and weakening his body just enough as they would move in for the finishing blow. Rancic would quickly move onto a defensive stance, pushing the two back with his mighty mutant strength, just strong enough to combat them even in battleizer form. Deku would look at Rancic's body and see that the injuries were towards his abdomen, realizing that even with his metallic-like skin, if they beat down on him long enough, then they might be effective in wearing down the metal, making it soften just enough to land a critical blow. Both he, Bakugo, and Todoroki would decide upon a plan that they thought would be most effective. As they would engage into a fight with Rancic, Rancic would look on in delight, thinking that now he would get a chance to take out the Rangers, collect their morphers, and bring them back to Lord Dragon. As both Deku and Bakugo would move forth, they would go forward and duck two of his attacks, aiming two of their own straight towards his gut, Bakugo on the left and Deku on the right, as Deku would send out a large torrent of green flame enhanced by his ranger powers, as well as Bakugo sending out a powerful red explosion enhanced by the powers of the Tyrannosaurus, weakening and softening his midsection, as Todoroki would create an even larger torrent of ice. He could feel the enhancements of the morphing grid working on his quirk, as the torrent of ice would effectively blast Rancic in his lower gut, shooting him into the side of the wall, as the three boys would stand beside one another, preparing to launch their final assault. Both Eric and Wes would get back onto their feet to see what the boys were doing, and would decide to aid them in their final attack also, as everyone moved and they would launch to send their final attack straight towards him. Deku would summon fire in both of his hands, Bakugo his largest explosion, and Todoroki his strongest torrent of fire, as the Mastodon, Dragon, and Tyrannosaurus Ranger would then shoot out a large blast of explosive heat that would be shot straight towards Rancic, dealing a critical blow, as Eric and Wes would respectively use the Quantum and Red Ranger blasters, aiming them specifically to combine with the boys' assault, effectively doing much more damage to Rancic as he would fall out of his metallic form back onto the ground. As the monstrous mutant would be slow to get up, Eric and Wes would quickly arrive, their cryostasis prison card at the ready, preparing to put him under arrest and keep him at bay. As Rancic would be slow to get up, they would quickly put him into custody, now effectively storing him away within the prison card. They would soon keep it held within a containment pocket on their pouch, before effectively powering down, knowing that they wouldn't have much time as Rancic, although weakened, was still powerful, and that they had to make sure that they got this prison disc back to Time Force immediately. Although where in Time Force would be rather difficult. However, before they even had time to make any sort of plans like that, the three young Rangers would run up to them, asking them who they were and where they had come from, and how were there other Power Rangers here. The two would demorph and introduce themselves, explaining that they were Time Force Power Rangers from the year 2001, as they would ask how far into the future was this timeline. Deku would explain that they were about 400 years into the future respectively, and they would remark that up until now there were no other Power Rangers in this timeline. This would worry both Eric and Wes, as they would ask if there were anyone here that they could trust and talk to. Principal Nezu making his way down quickly to the arena floor, as he would introduce himself to the Time Force Rangers, telling them that they had a private place where they could talk. Soon the Time Force Rangers would be introduced to Alpha 6, the two of them being rather relieved as they were aware of who Alpha was, as he did exist in their timeline. Alpha would have many questions for them as they would have for Alpha. They would soon learn the story of this Alpha 6 unit, explaining the history of Lord Draken and everything that had befallen the Power Rangers. This would worry both Eric and Wes as within their own timeline, Tommy Oliver never turned evil. In fact, he continued to be a force for good, creating soon more Ranger teams that he would be a part of, such as the Zeo Ranger team, the Turbo Ranger team, and it was even said that he had come out of retirement recently and been a part of a team known as the Dino Thunder Power Rangers. Alpha being surprised at this news, knowing that there was another Tommy Oliver who was actually good, believing that whatever had befallen them had only befallen his universe. But still, there would be more danger at hand. Principal Nezu would explain the situation to the Time Force Rangers, remarking that their main goal was preparing for whenever Lord Draken would attack again, and that they had been trying to form their own team of Rangers in the meantime. They would also give the brief rundown on the history of quirks in this world, as both Eric and Wes would be shocked by this news as quirks didn't necessarily exist in the future that they were familiar with, and that if this timeline had quirks, then it was obvious that even more so was being changed. They would also remark that up until recently, Rancic had already been in prison, but the fact that he was able to escape must have meant that Draken had sprung him free, and most likely added him to his ranks. Now seeing that Lord Draken was recruiting Rangers, villains from the past, and adding them to his army, it was obvious that now he was effectively declaring war, not just on his own Rangers, but on almost every Ranger within the multiverse. As this news would have to be reported to Time Force immediately, along with any other Ranger teams that they could get a hold of. They would thank them for their assistance before leaving with them a special multi-dimensional communicator. It had ties directly to Time Force, and if they had any other situation, they were to use this device to contact them immediately. That they were to ask for someone named Trip, and that the green-haired being would aid them in any way that they needed to. As they were about to bid them farewell, Deku would have a lot more questions to ask them about their ranger powers and what they could do. As being the hero nerd that he was, he would bring out a spare notebook that he had, as he would try to write down as much information as possible, as Wes would try to answer Deku's questions as best he could. While Eric didn't want to be rude, he was kind of annoyed at it all and was ready to go back home, now that they had captured Rancic once again. Alpha would ask one more question though. He would ask if things in their future, if they had turned out alright, what exactly happened to make Tommy Oliver not become as evil as he once was? Wes and Eric would simply explain that for whatever reason he just chose to be good. From the history that they could gather, when he was broken from Rita's spell, he sided with the Power Rangers, and from there he continued to be an ally even to this day, fighting off against evil no matter where it was, becoming a mentor and a friend to them. They would recount the many adventures that they had gone on, even one just a few years ago when them, along with many other former Red Rangers, had gathered together to defeat the remnants of the Machine Empire on the moon, as well as destroying Serpentera. Alpha being surprised to learn that Serpentera had actually been destroyed in another timeline, as Lord Zed had effectively kept it around, and Draken used it personally during his conquest of Angel Grove, as he used Serpentera to effectively destroy the other Zords before attacking the command center. With all of the news that they had been given, the Time Force Rangers would bid the heroes farewell before leaving back to their own timeline with the captured Rancic, as they would make sure to tell the others to completely destroy the Cyclobots and not to leave any of their parts left for chance. However, Alpha would take one of the Cyclobots, wanting to study them and use whatever information that he could for future purposes, as Endeavor and the other heroes would be on cleanup duty, making sure to wipe away all of the scrap metal immediately. Unknown to the heroes, a certain villain had been watching everything unfold in the distance, before eventually warping himself through a warp gate and returning back to his master Shigaraki to report the news of what had happened. He didn't hear much, but there were terms that were rather peculiar, things like multiverse, time travel, and Power Rangers. As Shigaraki was sitting in a chair after he had finished playing around and dissecting whatever that green monstrosity was that they had been captured from the USJ, as well as a strange gray-like monster with a shriveled up face and a Z on its chest, they were able to see that its body was rather weak, but if it was experimented on enough, it could prove to be of some use to them. They had to learn more about whatever this thing was, and even more so, who were these Power Rangers? With the news being kept on the low, the three young heroes would all be gathered into Principal Nezu's office, Shoto Todoroki being brought up to speed on everything that happened, and that, for better or for worse, he was now a Power Ranger, now being the Black Mastodon Ranger, to go alongside Deku, who was now the Green Dragon Ranger, as well as Bakugo, the Red Tyrannosaurus Ranger. With all of them caught up on everything now, they would soon have to get ready for school once again. However, in the meantime, they would have some time off, so they should use it to rest. As they would be excused, Todoroki would be given a communicator watch by Alpha, allowing him private access to both Deku and Bakugo, as well as himself whenever he needed information or whenever there was an emergency. As the three boys bid the teachers farewell, they would now talk amongst themselves, realizing that whoever Lord Draken was, he was now sending other villains from other timelines and dimensions to potentially come after the students as well, as it seemed the power coins were his #1 target. All Might taking this more and more personal, similarly to how he could potentially be hunted down for having One for All. These young students were also being hunted for power that had been passed down to them. And now even more so, he was determined to train and make sure that these young heroes were more than ready for whatever came their way next. Mr. Aizawa agreeing as well, noting that many of the students had shown potential during the sports festival, and that pretty soon they were going to have to pick whoever would be the remaining Rangers. As the teachers talked amongst themselves, and the three young Rangers walked home in an awkward silence, not sure how to react now that they had a new member to the team. Meanwhile, in Hosu City, a young hero known as Ingenium is left in a pool of his own blood, as he has now been the victim of an attack. The hero killer has now made his presence known, and he is out to cleanse the world of all false heroes. This concludes What If Deku Was a Power Ranger? Heroes of the Morphing Grid, Part 3. For all this and more, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share, hit that bell for post notifications so you can stay up to date on everything that is Power Core Productions and Podcastings that is to come out now and in the future. Also, be on the lookout for the What If trailer, as you're going to be giving a sneak preview for upcoming stories, and vote in the comment section below of that video for what stories interest you the most, for which ones would be your favorite, and which ones that you want to see on Power Core Productions and Podcastings. The videos that I see get the most votes and the most, suggestions, that's going to be the videos that get made earlier. So please be on the lookout for the trailer video and comment the one that you like down below so that I know where you want to take the channel going forward. But anyway, that's going to do it for the end of this video. I'm Javon Harrington with Power Core Productions and Podcastings, signing off, and I'll see you next time.